Again, I'm Robert Barron. I'm an assistant professor of industrial engineering at Western New England University. And I am part of the Futures Project, which is the Infuse supported project, which is developing a concept of this sustainable small town and rural community, which is using renewable energy to do water treatment and especially provide fertilizer and energy. And our study area is the Central Arkansas River Basin in southwest Kansas. And the CARB region has, among other things, a significant problem with depletion of the Ogallala Aquifer. And this is a map that illustrates the CARB region, and darker red is bad. So there's a significant problem with water resources. And to give some context about our stakeholders, in the CARB region, we have stakeholders who tend to be middle-aged individuals. Mr. Tesk, Don Tesk, is or was the president of the Kansas Farmers Union. He's a typical stakeholder in our study. And about 85% of the farms in Kansas are family owned. So our stakeholders are middle-aged farmers. They're not researchers, academic researchers. They probably don't hold advanced degrees in engineering or economics or other subjects, but they are farmers, they are businessmen. And what I'm going to do today is to talk not so much about lessons learned from engaging with our stakeholders, as much as lessons learned about how to engage our stakeholders. And I'm going to discuss that in the context of a stakeholder engagement tool that the Futures Project is developing, and that I am leading the effort to refine this tool right now. And we call this tool FuCalc, and it's intended to allow our stakeholders to experiment with different ways to manage their farm in different contexts of various climate policies and renewable energy investment scenarios. And so we're developing this tool, the idea being that we're going to help farmers understand how their farm management decisions are affecting their long-term economic prospects as farmers. And in the process of developing this tool, I happened upon an article which has become a godsend in terms of helping me to communicate more effectively in general, but with stakeholders in particular. This is the article here, The Science of Scientific Writing, and it's about 30 years old now. It was originally published in 1990, but it's been republished many times. And in reading this article, I realized that I was approaching stakeholder engagement all wrong, and that what I really needed to do was look at the stakeholders' expectations. And Gopin and Swan really illustrate and discuss in depth how stakeholder expectations shape their perceptions, and how we as stakeholder engagement practitioners really need to focus on our stakeholders' expectations in order to effectively communicate with them. And as an example of how expectations drive perception, this is an example from Gopin and Swan of 3 different ways to present temperature versus time information. Up at the top, we have just a list. It's not even an ordered list of temperature observations at various times. And it's very confusing. You can't make heads or tails of it. We could create a table. And if we created a table with temperature on the left and time on the right, it could maybe be a little more effective, but it's still very confusing because the context that we want is on the right and the information we're seeking is on the left. So we kind of get the information before the context. It's confusing. So generally, the way we're going to present this sort of data is to have our context on the left, the time, and the new information on the right. And that's driven by an expectation. A reader who reads from left to right is going to prefer a context where prefer a presentation where the context is on the left and the new information is on the right. And although Gopin and Swan discuss this in terms of written prose, the same holds true for visuals. So it's also useful for us when we are developing our FuCalc tool. And we see here that if we have a time versus temperature graph, it doesn't make any sense. But if we instead present the information as temperature as a function of time, we see here that temperature is increasing and plateauing at some level after about 15 minutes. Makes perfect sense. And so the main recommendations that Gopin and Swan suggest in terms of the written prose is to minimize subject-verb separation. Just get right to the point. And to provide the necessary context before you present new material. So at the beginning of your sentences, make sure it's clear what you're talking about. Whatever object you're telling a story about is mentioned at the beginning of the sentence. And also put old information there for context so the reader understands where they're going. And then put the things you want emphasized at the end of sentences so that the reader gets the information there, the new information, after they've received context. And this is all, again, based on expectations. Expectations that the verb of a sentence will follow very closely after the subject. So once you give the subject of the sentence, follow it immediately by the verb. Don't put dozens and dozens of words in between the subject and the verb. And make sure that you respect the expectation that the audience will look for context at the beginning of the sentence and new information at the end. And finally, it's critical to make sure that you understand the audience's level of understanding. We, as experts in our field, may think that something goes without saying, when in fact, it really does not. And this is something that I as a teacher, have learned to look out for, because I will say things in class and I think it's obvious, and then my students, they just don't understand. They don't see the logical connection between two concepts. And it's really trained me to go back and be more careful about how I present information. So let's take a look at how we can apply these best practices to developing the FuCalc tool in order to better engage with our stakeholders. So in this is the interface. This is a prototype of FuCalc, and we are working on refining it. But this prototype does incorporate many of these best practices. So after this paper, after I read this paper, we developed an interface so that we have our context, or the information that is input into the model, is on the left. So this is the information that the users are going to input into our model. So on the left, we have all of the information the farmers put in about their own farm, about things like the value of energy in their area, costs they're paying for electricity, and then they make selections about how many different types of renewable energy investments they want to make. And as the farmer is making changes here, we have this graphic in the middle, which provides context and new information. So the context being the farm. This is a picture of a farm. In the final version, we're going to try and make this a picture of the user's farm by using Google Maps. But it's a farm, and as the user makes changes to the amount of information or crops or various sliders on the left, that is reflected with changes in the graphics here. So the user has the context of their farm. The new information then would be the icons that appear that indicate how the selections have been made in the model. And then once the model is run, the information is presented on the right. So we have context and then a bridge that connects the old and new information. And then on the right, we have the output from the model. Now in the revised version of the model and the refined version, again, we're going to have a more sophisticated context mechanism to connect the user's familiar experience, their farm, with the decisions that they're making. And we're also working on refining the visuals, but the basic concept is going to remain the same. We are closely connected between the subject, the information and choices the farmer's making, and the output. And we are using context, our visuals, to create the context the farmers need to understand the output of the model. And so we are working on this, and we're so far developing an increasingly long list of changes to make. But these concepts of minimizing subject-verb separation and putting the context at the beginning of sentences or the beginning of a presentation and the new information at the end have really significantly improved the quality of the tool that we have and significantly improved the progress that we've made. And so we're looking forward to developing over the course of this summer a new and much more refined FewCalc tool, which we're going to be deploying to the web, and will hopefully be a much more effective stakeholder engagement tool versus some of the less effective methods that we have tried earlier on in the project.